Okay, let's dive right into this explainer. We're going to take a cold, hard look at an insane inciting incident, the massive, totally accidental data dump from the May 22nd, 2026 PSUR archive. Now, for 75 years, we've been told, right, that the government just doesn't officially study the physics of unidentified anomalous phenomena. Period. But the father of the hydrogen bomb didn't just build nukes. The newly declassified files we're unpacking today prove, without a doubt, that he was actively doing the math on these anomalous craft all the way back in 1949. Let's pull up the raw data and see exactly what slipped through the cracks. So, on that day in May, the Pentagon initiated what they called Release 02. They dropped 64 new, highly classified assets straight into the public domain. And among them was something completely unprecedented. We're talking about a 116-page file originating directly from the Department of Energy, designated DOE UAPD017. The implications of this specific document are just staggering, and honestly, the intelligence community has been scrambling ever since it hit the servers. Because, think about it, for 75 years, we've been fed this public lie. The whole era of Project Grudge, where literally every inexplicable event was just waved away as weather balloons, temperature inversions, or, swamp gas. But then, on the flip side, we have the classified reality. Document D017 details 209 extreme sightings near Sandia Base in New Mexico between 1948 and 1950. And Sandia wasn't just some random outpost. It was the absolute beating heart of America's nuclear weapons assembly and engineering. So the empirical reality here? America's nuclear stockpile was being actively, repeatedly breached. But the absolute smoking gun of this entire forensic audit, the exact piece of evidence that just completely shatters that official narrative, is buried right here on page 90 of this DOE document. I want you to picture a really tense, smoky room in 1949. We're doing a hard flashback to a highly classified conference held at Los Alamos National Laboratory on February 16th of that year. And this isn't hearsay, okay? This document actually gives us the verbatim minutes of what was discussed, setting the stage for a totally paradigm-shattering revelation about the early Cold War. Just listen to this roster: Norris Bradbury, Frederick Reines, John Manley, Marshall Holloway, astronomer Lincoln La Paz, and theoretical physicist Edward Teller. The architects of the atomic age, the absolute highest echelon of American science, all assembled in one room for a very specific, classified purpose. And let me tell you, it had absolutely nothing to do with fighting the Soviets. Section 1. Reverse Engineering Kinematics. It was during this exact meeting that Edward Teller stood up and actually performed a back-of-the-envelope calculation to mathematically reverse engineer these anomalous craft. And Teller wasn't treating them like magic. He was treating them as hard mathematical physics based on the Lense-Thirring effect, which is also known as frame dragging. Proven way back in 1918, the math essentially says that if you spin a massive object at extreme speeds, its intense gravitational field physically drags and twists the local vacuum of space-time right along with it, kind of like a drill bit twisting water in a glass. The documents show Teller and his team understood that these craft were generating their physics by spinning highly pressurized, supercooled plasma inside a magnetic torus. But here's the catch. When you actually apply that physics, you run headfirst into a catastrophic kinematic divide-by-zero error. To wrap your head around the horrifying physics of the L-cube warp metric, you've got to look at the velocity equation. Velocity equals change in distance over change in time. Well, if a craft is wrapping its hull in a localized space-time metric disruption, actively bending time itself, the time variable literally drops to zero. And when time reaches zero, the velocity approaches infinity. It triggers an absolute collapse of the targeting mathematics on federal computers. As the document states, this mathematically drops its radar cross-section to absolute zero. That one sentence completely grounds the paranormal into undeniable empirical science. The FBI and the military, they weren't witnessing a really fast aircraft over those nuclear bases. They were witnessing an extraterrestrial temporal breach. Section 2. The Atomic Anomaly. Now let's look at the terrifying why behind all this. Look at the direct chronological cause and effect that the architects of the Cold War were so desperately trying to understand and contain. In July 1945, we detonate the Trinity test. 2 years later, July 1947, a craft crashes at Roswell.
And then, less than 2 years after that, in February 1949, the Los Alamos Meeting takes place to figure out the math. It's a direct timeline.
And here is exactly what tripped that cosmic wire. On one side, you've got human physics. The detonation of a plutonium core converts raw mass directly into energy, right? E equals mc squared. The instant the atomic lattice ruptures, it doesn't just yield a massive kinetic shockwave, it releases a catastrophic burst of intense gamma radiation. But then, on the other side, you have the technology of these craft, relying on an Alcubierre warp metric and spinning supercooled mercury plasma. The source text explicitly states that the raw conversion of mass into energy from human atomic testing violently disrupted the localized space-time metric that these craft actually relied on to fly.
Which leads us to this massive revelation buried in the text. The United States military did not shoot down the Roswell craft. They inadvertently caused it to crash by poisoning the electromagnetic airspace. I mean, just let that hang in the air for a second. When these highly advanced craft flew through the residual electromagnetic fallout of the post-Trinity atomic tests, the uncalibrated high-voltage ionization of the atmosphere violently phase-canceled their magnetic field disruptors. Their anti-gravity fields just collapsed, and the craft plummeted straight into the desert.
So, faced with the reality of an intelligence capable of space-time metric disruption, actively supervising our nuclear arsenal, what did the government do? Well, they launched Project Grudge in 1949, directed by Lieutenant Colonel Aaron J. Bowman. The documents expose the devastating reality that the deep state didn't initiate this operation to objectively investigate the phenomenon. No, it was forensically designed as a public relations smokescreen. They had to classify the atomic emission spectra and completely hide the fact that our most highly guarded nuclear fortresses were 100% defenseless against this advanced physics. Which brings us to a final, chilling question to wrap up this explainer. If the very architects of the atomic bomb, the absolute highest echelons of the scientific establishment, were mathematically reverse engineering anti-gravity and temporal displacement way back in 1949, are we currently living amidst the radioactive wreckage of our own classified future? Have they been building this breakaway technology in the dark for 75 years? It's a provocatively terrifying thought, and it forces us to reevaluate everything we've been told about the Cold War, the limits of modern physics, and the true nature of our airspace. Thanks for joining me as we unpack these documents. Keep your eyes on the data and always keep questioning the narrative.